and come back by bullet train. Yeah, so that's going to be fun. No extra cost to you, and it gives us a lot more time in Florence, a lot more free time in Florence. So that's fun. Florence is basically going to be, just so there's no wrong expectations, Florence is basically going to be an outside tour, other than the museums where the David statue is. We'll go into there, but we have to stand in line in that. So that's going to be first. So we'll go there first, and then we'll do the museum, then we'll come out and do an outside walking tour of the various sites, and then lunch, and then if you want to go into the Duomo, which is the famous church that you see in the pictures of Florence, if you want to go inside, you'll be free to do that, but that'll be on your own time. So we won't be doing that as a group per se. But many of us probably will want to go in and do that. For the rest of us who don't, it's a great shopping place. People tell me I don't give enough time to shop. So you'll have a lot of time in Florence, and the rest of it, no. So, but you know, take that time, and then we'll rendezvous, get back on a train, and go back to Rome. So that's going to be a fun day. Okay, well today we're talking about what happened here in terms of the sites that we're going to be visiting. I want to show you this map. We're going to highlight the areas of Paul's missionary journey, but when you look at this map today, you look at this and you think Europe. But there was no Europe in the time period that we're going to be looking at. No one in Paul's thinking or culture would have thought about Europe. They would have thought the empire. It's all the Roman Empire. And you might ask the question, how is it now? Of course, Italy is off to the left here on the other side of the Ionian Sea. You might ask yourself the question, well, how is it that Rome, expanded their empire so drastically? And of course, they were an aggressive people. They, were aggressive throughout the Italian peninsula, and then began to move into other areas of the Mediterranean region. But the interesting story about Greece is this. About 100 years after Alexander the Great, King Philip V of Macedonia, that's northern Greece here, decided to expand his territory, much like we see Putin doing over in Russia, expand his territory south into Greece proper. And so, obviously, it was a war. And the cities of Greece never was a country as up to this time in terms of a united government. They had city-states, and the city-states of Greece recognized there was no way they were going to be able to defeat Philip V and his armies coming down south. And so the city-states of Greece actually appealed to Rome in 196 BC, come and help us fight off the Macedonians. So Rome came, and they fought off the Macedonians and never left. And so it became the Roman province of Achaia that was 194, so 196 it became the Roman province of Achaia. Over time, there were attempts for the city-states to kind of throw off the Roman government. We'll talk about it when we get to Corinth, but Corinth is a particular case in point. In 146 BC, Corinth rebelled against Rome, and the Romans came in and actually burned the city to the ground and removed most of the population, and Corinth became a vacant city for almost 100 years. It's just an empty site. But by the time we get to Paul, things have changed, so we'll get to that. But so it's an interesting situation in that the site of Corinth, and you'll see it when we get there, and in our presentation here, the site of Corinth was so valuable in terms of its transportation location, ports on two sides into the Mediterranean, two sides of the isthmus, and Corinth is here on two sides of the isthmus. And so Julius Caesar in 44 BC, 100 years after the destruction, actually started rebuilding Corinth, and it was finished by Octavian. So when we see Corinth in its first century incarnation, it really is a Roman city. It's not really a Greek city, but we'll notice that when we get there. Okay, so let's start with the beginning of the second missionary journey. When you think about the second missionary journey, you're thinking about a very small slice of Scripture. It really takes in Acts 16, verse 1 to Acts 18, verse 22. That's the whole thing. And it happens that, well, that's the part of it that we're looking at. It begins as an overland journey across the nation of what we would call Turkey. Romans called it the province of Asia. And if you read in the book of Acts, it says Paul was hindered to go into the various regions he wanted to go into in Turkey, but he eventually comes to Troas, and there at the bank of the Aegean Sea, we read this. 16 verse 9. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. And when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. And during the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen this vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. And so that's Paul is in Troas where he has this vision. Troas is in Turkey. We were in Troas many times, but this is what's left of Troas today. I show you this slide to notice with you that this is, come on now. This is the ground level that you walk on in Troas, and see where the buildings are. These are the tops of the buildings. So, and this is typical of what we'll encounter as we go through the region. There are some cities it's not so because of the layout of the city, but in many of the situations we have about a 30-foot down. The actual first century level is 30 feet down from where we're walking. That's very true in Israel, and so the towns that we will walk on have been excavated, and for the most part. Athens, not so much, but the towns have been excavated so that we can see the ruins. Otherwise, there would be nothing there. Archaeologists look for these hills we call them tells, telling them that the civilization ruins are underneath that, and then they start digging and they run into things like this. Well, from Troas, where Paul had the vision of the Macedonian man, he crossed the Aegean Sea, and his first stop is Neapolis, and that's now the city of Kavala. And so it really is a pass-through for the Apostle Paul. He passes through it twice, well actually 3 times. This time he's passing through it heading east, and then he goes back after his other missionary journeys, sailing out of Neapolis as well. This is Neapolis today. I'm pretty sure the moon is photoshopped in. This is not an ancient site, really. There's not many ruins here. It's been built over, and so nothing of the ancient city really remains. I'm trying to find my notes. But the interesting thing about Neapolis is this is a city that took the goddess Athena as the patron saint, or the patron of the city. Also, of course, that's the patron of Athens. And Athena is in the Greek mythology the goddess of wisdom, war, and handcrafts. So how those things go together, I don't know, but that's it. And she's the favorite daughter of Zeus in the mythology. Athena's other information is Athena goes by many names. Athena goes by the name Pallas, which means girl. Also the name Parthenos. That might ring a bell with you. Parthenos means virgin. And so in the temple to Athena in Athens, where we go, it's called the Parthenon, the temple of the Virgin. So that's her. She also was, I said, the goddess of war, and her particular specialty in the mythology was she was the goddess of defensive war, whereas Ares was the god in Greek mythology of offensive war, aggressive war. And so when we get to Athens and we talk about the Areopagus, we're at the hill of Ares, the god of aggressive war, okay? Well, from that location, They moved through what's called the Via Ignatia, and that's the route of this major Roman road that connected the Ionian seaport with Istanbul, Byzantium at the time, or Constantinople when it was built. And then they would, if you were a Roman traveling this road, you would sail from Brindisi over to here, and then this was like high speed in those days to get to Asia, and it's jumping off point into the Asia territories. So that's the main road that Paul would have traveled, although not exclusively, because not all the towns are on that road. When you get to Philippi, you see the ruins of the Via Ignatia, and still there today. Philippi, obviously you hear the word Philip in it. Philippi was founded by King Philip II of Macedonia. King Philip II is the father of Alexander the Great. And he didn't actually build the city from scratch. He annexed the city because in the region there are gold and silver mines, and that's why the city initially was there, to have the workers for the gold and silver mines. But Philip annexed that. In the Roman era, Philippi actually shows up as a tremendously important time before Christ, and this is the time when the Roman government transitioned from a republic to a emperor-run kind of Roman situation. But previous to Julius Caesar, the republic was run by the Roman Senate. And if you remember, Julius Caesar kind of invaded Rome. When I get to Rome, I'll talk a bit more about that. And there was a civil war. But there were Republicans that kind of didn't like that kind of transition. Of course, they murdered Julius Caesar. Brutus, you remember the name, was one of them. And here in Philippi, interestingly enough, the heir to Julius Caesar, Octavian, who later is called Augustus, and his friend and cohort, Marc Antony, actually defeat the forces of the Republicans, Brutus and Cassius, in a war right outside Philippi. So it's an interesting situation. A lot of historians, you'll read them, says that the Roman Republic died in Philippi. And of course Octavian went back and became the emperor. And as soon as Octavian came into power, he created or designated Philippi a colony. And that actually is a word that shows up a lot in the book of Acts as you go from city to city. It's an important word because a colony means that the Roman government considers this city to be independent. It was self-governing. That's one thing about colony. Another thing was that everyone in the city was considered a Roman citizen. Very rare and very prestigious to have that be the case in your city. And it also is the place, therefore, that the Roman government would locate veterans who rotated out of their military service. This was the way that they paid the veterans. There wasn't a real lot of, like money. There was a small amount of money they got, but their big payday was when the veterans got out of military service, they were promised land. They soon ran out of land in Italy, and neither did the rich people want these veterans around them anymore. These people were very violent. So they started annexing cities around the empire, designated them colonies, and they would place the veterans there. Philippi was one of those cities. And so this was a very Roman city by the time that Paul got there, to the point where it was a predominant Latin was used predominantly there. So it brings up the question whether or not Paul had Latin. He might have, but we know that Latin was used there. This was the place where there wasn't enough Jews for Paul to find a synagogue. A synagogue demanded 10 Jewish families, 10 men who were married to form a synagogue. And so instead of that, he went to what he would expect to find, a place of prayer. And there by the river, he met Lydia, the dealer of purple from Thyatira. And he preached the gospel to Lydia and to the other women who were there. They were all women. And Lydia came to Christ, and invited the traveling group, who by this time was Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke, invited that traveling group to stay at her house and meet at her house. And so we consider this Europe, and so in a sense, this is the first church that ever met in Europe, what we would consider Europe, and that happened in Philippi in Lydia's house. Her house became the place where the church started meeting. One little insight that we don't often notice, and that is that in this era, it was common when a woman traveled that she was referred to by the region that she came from. In other words, Lydia was from the region in Turkey called Lydia. And it is possible that that was not her name. It was just what she was called on this business trip. She obviously was a woman with some means when she was in Philippi. So there's speculation that it could very well be that Lydia actually turns out to be either Euodia or Syntyche, who are at odds with one another, after Paul leaves this and the church is established, and he writes back to the Philippians and he says, I plead with Euodia and Syntyche to get along. And it could very well be that that's one of those names is actually Lydia, but we'll see. In this city is where we will hear about the demon-possessed girl, where Paul cast the demon out of her. She had a demon of future fortune-telling kind of thing, and her owners were getting money from that. And so when Paul cast out the demon, the owners took him to the officials, and he and Silas were put in jail. You remember the Philippian jail scene. And that's where, of course, the angel released them. Paul didn't leave, and he witnessed to the jailer, and he and his household came to Christ. There's good ruins in Philippi. There's a great theater we'll see. This is probably an area of the shops in the Agora, and that kind of thing. And this is also you can see the road for the main square of the city, the Agora. And that's the Greek word for the marketplace, Agora. The Romans would have called it a forum, but since we're mainly in Greece, we'll go with Agora. However, in the Romanized cities like Philippi and like Corinth, it was both an Agora and a forum. And the difference is the Romans used the forums for political and justice-related law enforcement, courts and that kind of thing. It all took place in the forum, whereas in a Greek city, in a more Greek city, the Agora was a strict marketplace. The other stuff took place elsewhere. So Paul wrote the letter back to Philippi in about 60 to 62 when he was in house arrest in Rome. He has fond memories of this church. In Philippians, he talks about his fondness with them. He talks about joy and suffering, humility being called for, and thanksgiving being called for. At the site, as I mentioned, we'll see the Via Ignatia. We'll see the Roman Forum, which is what we're looking at right there. We'll see a bath complex for the Roman baths, and the way that they heated the baths and the various Caldaria, Frigidaria, cold water, warm water, hot, and it's kind of interesting to see that. And we'll also we'll be able to get a peek into the Roman latrine. Now maybe that's not all that interesting to you at first blush, but this latrine is a 42-seater. So picture that in a busy day. So anyway, then we'll also be able to see the traditional spot of Paul's imprisonment. So I'm going to show you a brief video. This is a little clunky, so just bear with me.